Never before Francis was there a pope from Argentina. He was the first pope from the New World, the very first Latin American pope in history.
De repente, la fumata blanca anuncia un nombre que al principio nos sonaba italiano y de repente cobramos conciencia que era un querido amigo de muchos años, el cardenal Jorge Bergoglio, el que había sido elegido pontífice de la Iglesia Católica. Dijimos, es uno de los nuestros. Es decir, la sensación de que alguien que conoce nuestras calles, nuestro pueblo, que ha olido América Latina, que sabe cómo se modula la religiosidad popular latinoamericana, era elegido vicario de Cristo. Caray, fue una experiencia muy, muy profunda.
There is one fundamental feature that Pope Francis brings with himself from Argentina, from Latin America, to Rome. A living dialogue between the tradition of the origins and the experience of the living faith of today. On the one hand, you have the faith of the people, the popular piety that in Latin America has become enormously important, and that is a basis of the theology of the people and of culture of Pope Francis. On the other hand, you have the faith of the origins. You have a dogmatic theology that has the task of defending the origins. And you have a pastoral theology that has to elaborate the faith of the people today. And they must stand continually in relation to one another.
A poor church for the poor, Pope Francis often said that he wanted. As in Rome, where here under the colonnade of St. Peter's, he set up medical care and bathing facilities for those most in need. Also as Archbishop in Buenos Aires, Argentina, he was particularly close to the poor and to the priests that served them.
Those back in the slums of Buenos Aires, called Las Villas Miserias, literally the homes of misery, say that despite his election to the papacy, he stayed true to the poor, true to his origins.
Me acuerdo de las primeras imágenes y era que mostraban los zapatos, ¿sí? Bueno, ahí te sintetiza. Él llevó el caminar que tenía en el barrio, lo llevó a su caminar en la Iglesia Universal. Yo hablaba de cercanía y creo que es una cuestión teológica, latina, creo que llevó, que son martirios de estos tiempos modernos. Desde Monseñor Angelelli en la Argentina, hasta el que fue canonizado al poquito tiempo que él llegó, ¿sí? Monseñor Romero de América, San Oscar Romero de América. Él llevó esos martirios propios del siglo XX, los llevó. Esos martirios que fueron la siembra de esta iglesia que es América Latina, una iglesia joven, ¿sí? Una iglesia abierta, una iglesia en diálogo con la realidad, una iglesia que no tiene miedo a ensuciarse, una iglesia inculturada. Eso es lo que llevó. Y seguramente el Espíritu Santo seguirá dando nuevos alientos de vida aún después de Francisco.
But the first wasn't just a first for Argentinians. Catholics across Spanish-speaking nations were all represented by one of their own.
Y rezar y desear para que el Señor me bendiga.
Pope Benedict and St. John Paul II, they spoke very good Spanish, but it's a different thing hearing him in a different accent, Argentinian accent, in our own language. It was a beautiful moment, but also that he understood us and he knew where we were coming from and where we wanted to be too. And I think it's very fitting, both Pope Francis and Pope Benedict, the first international trip they had, both of them, was a World Youth Day. We were like 3 million people in Copacabana. It was an amazing experience to hear him in our own language, but also his approach and everything. I think, and of course, that World Youth Day was tons and tons of Latin American. It was a beautiful experience to see him, to be with him, and yeah, and from there it was the start of, okay, this is how it's going to be. Very different than we were used to, not in a bad way, it's just different.
Mexican Archbishop Jorge Carlos Patron Wong worked closely with Pope Francis in Rome for 8 years before he was appointed Archbishop of Mérida on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. For him, Pope Francis spoke their language in more than one way.
So there is a combination of maturity and youth, and Pope Francis is noticeable because there is a theological and ecclesiastical maturity, but at the same time, a very practical dynamism in Latin America that is also noticeable, and that the language of Pope Francis, his way of communicating, is very Latin American, with his words, gestures, images that are very close to the people, but that have an extraordinary theological and religious depth.
Francis traveled to a variety of countries across Latin America, including Cuba, Chile, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, and Panama.
En Brasil, el contacto con los jóvenes, que no son el futuro sino el presente, apoyando al Papa, la juventud del Papa Francisco, eso fue muy significativo. En segundo lugar, el viaje a Chile, Bolivia, el encuentro con los movimientos populares, su prédica en Santa Cruz de la Sierra, donde se dio el segundo encuentro de los movimientos populares, donde él dice que hay que convertir la pasión en acción comunitaria, que yo diría la acción comunitaria es la política, la mejor política. Colombia, por ejemplo, ¿no? Donde se estaba llevando adelante este histórico, largo y lento camino por el diálogo social, por la paz. Fue muy importante que el Papa estuviese allí, que visibilizara ese proceso, que escuchara todas las voces. En México los mensajes a los obispos, el diálogo con los obispos ha sido uno de los más fuertes que yo recuerdo en conferencias episcopales locales y al mismo tiempo de conciliación. Yo creo que en cada país de América Latina el Papa ha tocado justamente esos botones que son los resortes de un futuro esperanzador.
José Manuel de Urquidi, a Mexican-American participant in Pope Francis's Synod on Synodality in Rome, says that for Latinos in the United States, the fact of sharing a culture put them in a better position to understand him more clearly than non-Latinos, but also to see him as a human being.
I think it has been a very unique thing for Latinos to see he's a person, right? We didn't have a pope that, okay, he was chosen as a pope and then he became this angel or this living saint. Not at all. He has been very close and he's spontaneous. Sometimes he says things that we Latinos get because of the context of the culture, of the background, the lived experiences, etc., etc. So it's easier for us maybe to understand that than maybe other people in other cultures.
Having a Latin American pope was a unique experience for Hispanics across the globe, and one that may not be repeated in any of our lifetimes. Or perhaps it will be, and we'll soon have the second Latin American pope in history.